Hey everybody, welcome to Chuck Yates Needs a Job. This is what I'm going to call the intro to the Bryan Sheffield Chronicles. As many of y'all know, I got to go to Australia. Bryan's put together a big play in the Beetaloo Basin. We've had some content on it. We had Alex Underwood on to talk about the Beetaloo Basin. We're going to show more of this content, but I thought what I'd do right now is we put some clips together. And we've just kind of thrown them out on X and LinkedIn, and people have really liked them. So I'm going to put them all together here, and you'll start getting a sense for Bryan, what he's all about, what he's been doing in Australia. And then over the next coming weeks, we're going to put together more in the way of content there. Bryan had a fascinating dinner with a fellow named Ben, who's a traditional owner in Australia who wants to build an oil field service company. And so watching him and Bryan talk about how this guy can build the company and make money off Bryan was one of the most fascinating things I thought about the trip. So we're editing that podcast, and we'll get that out in a week or two. But anyway, I thought you'd enjoy all these clips, and this is kind of warming you up for more from Bryan.
It won't bite me? Be careful. Be careful. Where? Front. That one? He's gonna bite me.
Nice. There we go. Look at that. We got a pair.
Oh yeah, buddy. That's big. From the bay here?
What's going on?
I heard the wildest rumor.
Yeah.
I heard big Texas oil man Bryan Sheffield came here and tried to buy this place.
I don't know about that, eh?
And you told him to kiss off.
Yeah, he hadn't got enough money. US, eh?
We didn't have any depth control. We didn't know whether these wells here would come in at 2,000 meters deep or 2,500. There would be at least several hundred meters of uncertainty on depth. We didn't know what units we would see here. This was before we had enough penetrations to say, hey, we've got incredible regional continuity on some of these units. When we drilled this well, I was thinking that we'd be using the seashell as the landing zone. We literally had 24 hours with the logs while we were drilling the well to make a decision where we would land the well, and we pulled a last minute change to land the well in the B shell rather than the C shell, because the C shell looked better at Kalala S1 than the B shell did.
And by the way, just for America.
Oh yeah, so A shell is the deepest unit here. Then we've got what we call the lower B, think sort of like Utica analog. Then we got the B shell, which is the main target that we're looking at here as we're going up, and the C shell is the shallowest one.
In the Permian, we go A, B, C, D.
Yeah,
the other way from top.
A geologist did this, so we started from deepest to
Oh
shallowest.
God, that damn geologist.
You literally in 24 hours chose the target.
Yep.
That's crazy.
So rushed petrophysics on it, and then chose the B shell. After stage 7, we go to run our next plug, and we get caught early, but there was enough pressure behind the plug to dislodge it. We had to blank off a whole section of the wellbore, finish placing the rest of the stages, went to mill out. We could never get past the casing deformation. We cleaned up the well. I remember I was here, we're waiting for the well to kick on. We're losing our wellhead pressure. You have no idea whether you're gonna see gas or not. We didn't even know what the formation pressure would have been at this point in time. We had woke up and you could see this big glow of the flare because the camp would just be down right around this way, so you could see the flare from the camp.
How excited were you guys?
Oh yeah, it was like one of the, like next to kids being born. It was, it was honestly like you worked 3 years for this. In the Montney, you're drilling a well every second day. Here it's like 3 years to get a single well, and that's when the moratorium came in place, just before the election. We literally got notices right after the election saying, you guys got to stop.
Oh, you knew.
We risked the capital because we knew before we fracked the well, and we knew Labor was going to win. We knew that they were going to put a moratorium in place.
Y'all risked the capital because y'all figured.
We risked the capital because we didn't think we could win a battle without commercial proof of concept that there was actually something here. We didn't think we could win a fight.
I'm glad that wasn't my money.
No, you came in after.
I came in after. I got
you came in at the right. You came at the right time. Like the one thing that wildcatting is expensive, especially in Australia, and it takes a lot of money to actually work up a play to a point where you can actually do something with it. We originally thought that a mungie was going to be borderline oil. It came dry gas. Shows you how far off our early like basin model was.
Ted Collins is the savvy billionaire. He passed away a couple years ago, but he used to be CEO of a public company, and I forgot the history on that, but he always talked about how he's the only engineer that turned into a landman. Some people call him 2% Ted, and some people call him 10% Ted, some people call him 20% Ted. I don't know which one's right. I just knew he had 2 to 20% on almost every single freaking wellbore across the United States, because he wheeled and dealed in the Petroleum Club, Houston Petroleum Club. He knew every single public CEO. I mean, this guy is a gamer. I really didn't know much about him. I knew I was getting into Sprayberry and contract operating my grandfather's wells with Paul Treadwell, and we had no production. We're just a contract operator collecting Copus overhead, and we're gonna just pick up a couple of breadcrumbs in the Sprayberry. You know, when wells go down, the operated plugs are not watching their leases. So a 160 acre lease opened up in Upton County. We're gonna go lease it, we're gonna drill deeper and drill a Wolfberry multi-stage frac, Sprayberry plus the Wolfcamp, the Wolfberry play. So I got 75% of the lease. There's one mineral that's 75%. And there's this 25% guy, I think it was Lecluse, his last name, out of Fort Worth, on the edge of Fort Worth. And I was talking to him on the phone like once a week. I had to be patient. And you gotta remember, I'm only like 31, so my negotiating skills aren't, you know, I haven't been around the block. And finally I sent him over my lease, and he redlines it through his lawyer, and it takes like 9 months. But I'm about to get this, and I'm contracting my grandfather's wells, working on some other leases, but this is the first time I'm about to get 100% of lease, and then I can go promote it and go raise money to investors, because that means I can drill the lease. We're about to sign the lease, and then the guy says, you know what, I want to send this lease to a friend in Midland that is a good friend of mine, and I just want to make sure I feel good about this lease. So, okay, what's his name? He said Ted Collins. He says, I went to eat with Ted Collins like 6 to 12 months ago. He'll probably say this is the most fairest lease ever. The next day, Ted Collins calls me and he say, I got this lease here. This is a good friend of mine that I've known from 30 years ago or whatever it was. Say, Bryan, I just thought you should know I'm taking this lease. And I'm like, what? I thought you were going to look at the lease and bless it so I can take the lease, and now I got 100% block. And it's like, no, I like this lease. I want to take this lease. I'm just steaming inside. And I called Ted the next day, and I was like, Ted, I've been thinking about what you told me yesterday, and I am not freaking happy. I am not happy what you've done. I've worked for 9 months to try to lease this guy, and you just come and take the lease. And I don't know if there were some F-bombs or anything like that. And then he's like, Bryan, this is how the business is done. You got 75%, I'm gonna get the other 25%, I'm gonna sign the JOA, and this is how it's done. Told me how the leasing play is done in the Sprayberry. I was like so hot, and I came down. He ended up calling me 3 days later. He's like, Bryan, I've been thinking a lot about this. It's just not worth it. I know you're upset. Just take the lease. And I said, no, I'm steamed down. I'm good. As long as you sign my JOA, we're good. Don't worry about it. I sent my JOA. He signed it in 1 day. He didn't even redline it, and then he sent it back to me. That's what you call a cool partner, a very good partner. And so I had Ted in a lot of my wells after that, but I learned a lot on that one. What I learned is oil and gas is very competitive. You got to get the lease in the door. If you don't get the lease in the door, it's fair game. There's no like honor roll that, oh, you've been working this deal. That's not how it works. I was thinking about my first oil well. Well, Parsley Energy and I. Paul Treadwell and I were the only 2 employees when we drilled the Dusek number 1. It was a Wolfberry well in the middle of the Midland Basin. It's right off 349 on the border of Upton County and Midland County. Paul and I were contract operating my grandfather's wells, about 110 stripper Sprayberry wells, on average about 3 barrels a day. Right when we started contract operating, the financial crisis hit. So we had no debt, we had not sold equity. We kind of just watching from the sidelines. This Dusek track, Carlos Dusek's actually a good friend. He became a good friend over time after we drilled on him. Him and his family live out there. And that's why we call it the Dusek. You could see a 320 acre slot that was surrounded by vertical wells, Sprayberry wells all over the Sprayberry. For some reason, this 320 acre tract was never drilled. It just sat there. And I saw a name on there, because you can see a name if someone leases it. It said Charlie Quia. And I told Paul, and I had a land broker, I think his name was Ryan Roberts. I said, I know Charlie Quia. I used to play tennis with him in junior when I was in junior high and high school, and he I'm gonna call him up and just cold call him and just call him up and see. Hopefully he remembers me. I mean, I went to SMU for 4 years and traveled the world and all that, and moved to Chicago and Spain, and I'm 28, 29 years old, and I'm gonna call him up and see if he remembers me. And I called him up and say, hey, I got Charlie, it's Bryan, and you remember me from the tennis days? And he remembered everything about me. You remember? And I was like, I've just moved to Midland. I'm operating, and I'm a contract operator, but I want to drill my own wells. And I noticed that you have a lease that's about 10 miles away from my grandfather's old Sprayberry well, and I have a pumper in the area, and if I drilled the wells, I could just fold it in to our operation of the wells. And tell me about this tract that you have leased. And he ended up talking to me. I couldn't believe that he was actually talking to me. I mean, like a 29-year-old with no track record. Why would he want to flip to me? And he starts telling me this is the second time he's leased it up, I remember. Second or third, where he's leased up 70% of the mineral owners. And it was a real fragmented tract. And 20 to 30 of the mineral owners, you had to get it all leased up. And it's a big pain in the ass to get them all leased up within the 3-year term. 1 year has already gone by, or maybe a year and a half. And you say, I can't get ConocoPhillips to farm out to him. And that would be the 100% block. And I remember like Ryan Roberts knew the ConocoPhillips land manager or something like that. And he ended up having a beer with him at Nate, and that guy agreed to like a 6-month term assignment. And Ryan's like, I got you something. I got you a 6-month term assignment. That's the only thing we're agreeing. I was like, done. Do it. Like, no operator would ever do something like that. Ever. And we ended up getting it done. It takes another 6 months to get it. And so now we're under a year on the mineral owners on their leases. And by the time we get ConocoPhillips, I have 1 year to put together. I think we drilled 4 wells in there, and we drilled 2 other wells, my first 6-well package. And I have 1 year to go sell it to investors. And ask for like a 10 to 12% upfront carry promote on each well. And the investors will earn the offset prove undeveloped, and we'll drill those heads up when we downspace. It's pretty wild how I raised the money on the fly. I went back to some of my grandfather's old investors that they drilled Sprayberry wells with them in the 70s and 80s. Most of them have passed. Some were in the 80s. They weren't interested. They were collecting the dividends. So I got a lot of no's the first few months. Talked to this Abilene family that used to invest with my grandfather. The sons, I met the sons and went out to their office at a cattle ranch outside of Abilene. They turned me down. This Lubbock cattle family turned me down. They all just wanted to continue collecting dividends, and they didn't want to drill because that took significant dollars. But I ended up getting a couple of traders out of Chicago and a Houston family, 30 or 40% of the, 6 wells, $12 million program. Or it is like less than that because Wolfberry wells around 1.5 at the time. And then a lot of guys in Midland heard that I had put together a package right in the middle of the fairway, a Wolfberry package. And yes, I was promoting somewhat, but the economics worked where it's like a 40% wellhead return, and then you also earn your PUDs heads up, which will drive the returns even more when you downspace and drill the wells. And there's a whole like UT Mafia group in Midland. I could name all their names, and they all, like, one guy came in and said, I want to take a piece of that package, and one of them took it. All these other guys took 5%, and then I was subscribed finally over like 6 months. And so we had about 6 months to drill the well, the first well of the 6-well package, and it was Dusek number 1 was the first well. And I had commitment signed with investors in the joint operating agreement, but I met with the rig operator, Jackie Matthews, to contract his rig. And I met with him at this Mexican food restaurant called Reina's. I think it's called Reina's. And man, it was like this deep dive Mexican food restaurant across the bridge on the other side of the interstate. And I couldn't believe it. He brought Mike Locker, who owned half his rig company and the mud business, Buckeye. And they came in and met with me, and I couldn't believe that they were willing to sign a contract with me when I basically wasn't sure if my investors would send the money when I AFE'd them. And I was taking a lot of risk. And the rig operator didn't ask me any questions about my financials. I guess he thought it was some rich oil boy that inherited money or something like that, which I didn't. Nothing from my grandfather or my father. And we ended up signing a contract within about a week. And I had to go buy the pipe from Textile. And they floated the pipe for me because I still didn't have the money until I AFE'd my investors. I actually, whatever dollars I had, I already built the location with my own money. And so I really took a lot of risk. And yes, I had a lot of working interest owners in my first program, like 20 or 30. And I felt good enough where if one or two didn't send the money, I could probably call someone else on that list to take up the slack. So that's kind of the part where I felt I could sleep at night. But you just never know the first well if the investors are going to send the money. And sure enough, I AFE'd. I cash called everyone for the full amount. And within 2 weeks, I had every single partner send their money to pay for the well. And that was kind of like, when you looked at the bank account, you felt relieved. And that was all about drilling the well. We drilled the well, did a turnkey deal with Matlock. I think it was in like 20 days or something, which isn't that good, the first well, but it's the first well they drilled in the area going deeper through the Wolf Camp. We used BJ Services to frack the well. And I told BJ, just do whatever Jim Henry's doing. And I hired an engineer named Nick Matches to perforate and design the frack. But also BJ was very instrumental of whatever you're doing over for Jim Henry, I wanted to do the same thing. And we ran 5.5 inch casing. I think Pioneer was still running 4.5 inch casing, so that gives you a wider diameter to get up to 100 barrels per minute on the frac. And I promised investors 80 barrel a day well, 60 to 80 barrel a day well. And I was kind of going off the Sprayberry EURs and IPs, initial production. And the well came in like 120 barrels. Paul Treadwell was out there when the well came in. He called me, and I remember I was in the grocery store, and I was like, he calls me and stop, and I swear to God, I did the Pee Wee Herman dance in the middle of the aisle in Albertsons, right off Garfield, across from the mall, catty corner from the mall when Albertsons was still there. And when you tell investors that you're going to make a 70, 80 barrel day well, and then it comes in 120, that just sets off a huge track record in the phone. Ever since, the phone just, all that my investors wanted more. They had cousins, they had friends, and my Rolodex went from 20 people to 100 people. And that's how Parsley Energy kind of started, through those carried working interests, running about 100 wells. I call them the promotion wells. And as I sold leases and retained interest, my cash flow started to pick up. And like, instead of selling 100% of the lease and getting the carry 10, 12% or whatever it was, I started to sell 80% of the lease, like midway, 2 years later, and I'd sell only 50% of the lease. And I outgrew my investors. But all my investors got their own non-op working interest. They got their own title. They got to do what they wanted to do with their own working interest. It wasn't through an entity. And that was the key. And most of the investors, that's how they liked it, because they can go sell their interest anytime they want. They can project their own budget. They can go non-consent. They don't have to drill future wells. So I kind of shifted a lot of the controls to them once they earned through the program. So that was, I look back, and that was one of the most successful and beneficial days that I've can always remember starting out Parsley Energy. It was an amazing time. Chuck was texting me about something else, and I told him I just found out my good friend Autrey C just passed about an hour and a half ago. I saw the news release, and I got really sad. Very, very sad, because he was like kind of a role model, competitor, but also a mentor when I grew Parsley from day one. Obviously, I had my grandfather and my father, but Autrey ended up becoming a big mentor of mine because he was actually in Midland while I was growing Parsley, so he was the easy one to grab lunch with. And he's an amazing, amazing oil man. He is the guy It's worth tens of billions of dollars. And he still flew Southwest to Dallas. And he always had like a 30-year-old car. It's all about his company. He was a guy that at 70 years old was still picking perfs in the wellbores. I think he stopped picking perfs in the wellbores around 70, 75, I heard. But every time a log would come in, he would pick the perfs for the wolfberry. Sprayberry at first and out in the wolf camp. And I know he picked the perfs and he would help implement the frac design and frac job on the wells. He also owned like every damn service company you could think of. Frac companies, wireline, pulling units, pipe yards, pipe distribution. I think he even had his own marketing company for his own oil, which is crazy because it's everything that I learned was focus on E&P, focus on downhole, and that's it. So it's just a different mentality, but he did believe in, he did come from the hard times of the Sprayberry field, increase your margins, and I believe that's where it came from, is by rolling up service companies to increase his margins, because it was very tight in the 90s, 80s and 90s when he was growing his company. Chuck wanted me to tell a couple of stories. I told him I'm too sad to do it, but I figured I might as well try it. And he likes, for some reason he likes windshield time. So I thought of one story. The first story where Autrey and I became friends, I ended up recruiting one of his best geologists. His name was Randy Brown. He was a well-known geologist in town. A little wild and crazy, Randy. Had a big heart, but he knew more about that Sprayberry field and the wolf camp than any other geologist in the entire Sprayberry field. Because he just worked it with Autrey since he was in his young 20s. And I think he ended up breaking through the wolf camp, was the first one to drill wolf camp wells with Earl Mickey. And those two guys don't get enough attention on the breakthrough. I think Jim Henry gets most of the credit, which he did. He's the one that first one to put significant capital into wolfberry wells. But Earl Mickey and Randy Brown were the first one to drill some wolf camp wells, I think in the 90s through Arco. But anyways, I recruited him. I basically poaching him from Autrey. I did not know Autrey well. And he's coming over. Took me a while to get Randy to come over. And one of the executives, Joel Costello, called me and said, "Bryan, Autrey's pretty upset about Randy Brown leaving. And you should at least call him." And I got off the phone and I realized I did not want to call Autrey Stevens. And I knew I had to, and it felt like I was being put in the hard chair when you're a kid in detention, you know? And so I just picked up the phone and called him, and I remember my armpits was just sweating. I was just sweating, just dripping sweat. And he picked up the phone. "Sir, this is Bryan Sheffield." And he said hello, and I said, I was calling you to tell you I should have called you first about recruiting Randy Brown, and I apologize. I didn't do it the right way. And he comes back and says, "Bryan, let's go have lunch." And he always liked eating at these greasy Mexican food restaurants across the tracks in Midland. We went to lunch within an hour, and we ended up becoming great friends. And Randy Brown ended up not coming on board. He reneged on me and stayed with Autrey, and ever since we had quarterly lunches, and we compared the Sprayberry field and service costs and talked about oil prices, and I gained more knowledge out of Autrey and as I became an oil man that you could ever imagine, learning just little details of him talking. And he doesn't talk too much, so when he does talk, you always kind of want to listen. He's that kind of an introvert engineer type. Another story, I was thinking about this tract, the Cox number 1 in Martin County. And I think we ended up buying like 30% working interest, and he had the other 70% of leasehold. And he actually had operation right in the JOA. And so I approach him. This is a track in the middle of Martin County, kind of in the center to the west a little bit. Close, right, touches that old Knox Ranch. It's right on the outside, more towards the center. And it's a 160-acre track, and I went to him, and I think we wrote a letter, and I went to him for him farming out the 70%. And I remember Mike Henson, my head of bee land, he's like, he'll never do that. He doesn't farm out to anyone. He wants to own every sprayberry acre. And we end up getting a deal, like $700 an acre. This is before the wolf horizontal play broke up. And he ended up saying yes to the deal. And I came back to my guys and I said, guys, we got the deal. And they couldn't believe it. And I was like, see, Autrey and I are friends. He likes me. We're friends. We could probably get some more deals from him. So we drilled a Cox number 1 and number 2 well on that track. And it was the worst sprayberry well that you could ever imagine. I think it came in like 9 barrels a day, and we projected to come in around 70 barrels a day. And I went back to Autrey and I said, Autrey, you remember that track you farmed to me? Well, it made 9 barrels a day. And I said, you knew that track was going to be dog shit. And, you know, he just had this little slight grin, this tiny grin, not enough to be cocky or anything, but you could see it on the side of his mouth. And I just shook my head and I kind of just laughed. And I think I told the same story on the video of one of his awards in Midland. Everyone in Midland was laughing, and he just knew what it tells me. Well, I said the dinosaurs didn't die right there in the middle of the sprayberry, but he knew, and he knows every little inch of the sprayberry field, and he knows where the dips are and where there's the sprayberry oil and where there's not. His pipe yard is by far the biggest pipe yard you can ever imagine. Probably bigger than the Exxon pipe yard, bigger than the ConocoPhillips pipe yard. He built the biggest pipe yard, I mean, probably in the world. Bigger than pipe distributors. You got to go see it. If you're in Midland, Texas, you got to drive by and see it. That kind of always is the shining star in Endeavor's office right there. You pass Endeavor's office and then the pipe yard's down the right. I forgot what highway it's off of. It's right off of some Waterburger out there. And I would always drive by his pipe. I always wanted to make sure if we're going out in the field, I'd always want to drive by that pipe yard. And I just always wanted to look at it because you can't see the end. It keeps on running down to the other highway. No, Autrey was a good man, and it's a sad day today. And he surrounded himself with good people that built that company. And now Diamondback's going to merge with them, and it's going to be one of the biggest powerhouse independents in the United States for many, many years. And I'm really happy for Diamondback and Endeavor on their merger. And Autrey got to do the deal before he passed. It's going to be a sad day. It's a sad day today. I'm going to be thinking of him and his family.